Inside our world today, we walk into storms wrapped in Gore-Tex waterproof boots and factory-sealed tents, and somehow we still end up soaked and shivering. The gear is rated for mountains built like a tank covered in labels that promise to keep us dry. Yet one long night of hard rain still finds its way in. Out on the old plains, winter rain did not fall straight down. The wind pushed it sideways, turned the ground to cold mud, and hung wet air so low it froze on skin. Most people fear snow, but the old families feared freezing rain more because it did not just sting the surface. It soaked, then stole heat from the inside out. So the real question is simple. How did they stay dry for days when everything around them turned into freezing water? Winter rain on the plains didn't just fall from the sky. It moved with the wind, ran across the ground, and soaked anything that stood in the wrong place. Out there, water had a mind of its own. It followed slopes, filled hollows, and pooled in every low spot it could find. And if your shelter sat in the path of that flow, the cold didn't knock. It walked straight in. Most people today trust the gear on their backs. They think a good tent can outwork the weather. It can't. Not when the ground turns to cold mud and the wind drives rain sideways. The people of the plains understood that sooner than anyone. They knew the first line of defense wasn't the hide above your head. It was the earth under your feet. So they looked for high spots, not cliffs, not ridges, just a gentle rise that let water roll past instead of pausing beneath them. A few feet of elevation could mean the difference between sleeping dry or waking up soaked. They always took the wind at their back, never at their chest, because wind is an engine. It pushes rain, carries it, and slams it into anything unprotected. Turning your shelter away from it gave the rain less room to bite. Then came the small but crucial step. Before a single pole went up, they spread dry grass across the ground, a thin layer woven by hand-light as breath. But that layer lifted them off the soaked earth and kept the floor from becoming a sponge. It was insulation in its simplest form. Not fancy, not perfect, just efficient. A dry foundation meant everything else could work, because staying dry never begins with walls or covers. It begins with choosing the one piece of the system that never moves, the ground. And once they locked that in place, they built the rest of the shelter, so the rain had no chance to cling. That is where the next hack begins. They had no nylon, no coated canvas, no fancy fabric that beads water on contact. Out on the plains, they had only hide and wind. And when winter rain came sideways, hide could betray you if you said it wrong. A flat sheet soaked fast, a wrong angle held water, and once water stayed, the cold followed right behind it. The people of the plains understood that rain wasn't just something that fell. It traveled, it searched, it found any surface that slowed it down. So they shaped the hide the way you shape a roof, not a wall. They pulled the top tight, dropped the sides low, and created a clean slope for the water to run off. Simple shape, big payoff, because a moving drop can't bite, only a resting one can. They also paid attention to wind because wind was part of the system. Wind pushes water, wind strips water, wind tells the rain where to land. So they always turned the open side of the shelter toward the clear horizon, not the storm. The back faced the wind. The hide leaned with it, and the rain slid off before it had a chance to cling. When they stretched the hides, they pulled along the grain, not across it. The long fibers carried water down instead of trapping it in the pores. It was a small detail you'd miss unless you had stood in storms, as long as they had. But that detail kept the hide from becoming a cold sponge. Then they locked the whole structure in place with inner tension lines, lines that held the angle steady when gusts tried to flatten the walls. The wind could scream all night, but the slope stayed true and the inside stayed dry. Dry walls meant dry breath, and dry breath meant a warm night even inside a storm. Because waterproofing was never about sealing gaps. It was about controlling where the water wanted to go. And once the shell shed the rain, the next step was simple. They built the floor so the ground couldn't steal the heat. Winter rain didn't just fall on the plains. It soaked the ground until it turned into a cold sponge, pulling heat out of the body faster than any storm in the sky. The people of the plains understood that long before science put a name to it. Cold from the earth beats cold from the wind. Every time. So they built the floor as if it were part of the system, not an afterthought. First came a thick bed of dry grass, laid wide and loose so it could trap still air. Air is insulation. Air is what keeps the cold from climbing. Then they set buffalo hides on top grain side down. That surface pushed moisture away and kept the warmer fibers facing up. Finally, they packed the edges with firm soil, just enough to stop the outside water from drifting in. 3 layers, one purpose. A dry body in a wet world. They didn't raise the floor high, only a few centimeters above the natural ground. But that lift changed everything. Once you're off the wet earth, even by a hand's width, the cold loses its grip. Your feet stay dry. Your core stays steady. The ground can't steal your heat if it can't touch you. It was simple physics disguised as common sense. Water seeks low ground. Heat escapes through contact. And still air held in place by grass and hide becomes a shield you can't see, but you can feel. Most people today worry about leaks from above. They forget the real enemy sits under their knees. Staying dry was never just about blocking rain. It was about breaking contact with the soaked earth beneath you. And once the floor was stable and warm, they turned to the next problem in the system. The moisture floating in the air itself. In cold rain, sweat is the silent killer. It doesn't shout, it doesn't sting. It just creeps out of the skin and turns every layer you wear into a wet blanket. The people of the plains learned that early. You can block rain from the outside, but if you get wet from the inside, nothing you built will save you. So they treated the body like part of the system, a furnace, a warm engine that worked only if it stayed dry. Their rule was simple: don't sweat into the cold. And they live by it the way others live by prayer. They move slow. They paced their breath. They stopped working before heat turned to moisture. Out there, pushing too hard wasn't strength. It was a mistake. The layers they wore weren't thick or heavy. They were thin, flexible, adjustable. A series of small switches instead of one big coat. If they felt heat rising, they opened a layer. If the wind sharpened, they closed it again. The goal was balance. Warm, but never wet. Dry, but never freezing. A steady rhythm, not a race. And it worked because the body reacts to cold the same way it reacts to heat. It listens. If you rush, it sweats. If you sweat, you lose heat. And once you lose heat in freezing rain, every waterproof trick on earth falls apart. When their breath stayed calm, their hides stayed dry. When their steps stayed steady, their clothes stayed warm. It was a human heating system built on patience, not effort. Most people today worry about the storm outside. They forget the real flood begins under the skin. Staying dry starts with breathing right, with pacing right, with knowing when to pause before the cold takes back what the body worked to keep. And once the body stayed dry, they focused on the next shield, the layer they built directly on their skin. They had no waterproof spray, no factory seal, no synthetic coat that forced water to roll away. Out on the plains, everything they wore was alive once, and anything alive could soak if you didn't prepare it. Rain didn't care how tough the hide looked. If water found a fiber to cling to, the cold would slip right in. So they built their own weatherproofing, not with chemicals, but with what the fire left behind. Warm animal fat mixed with fine ash created a natural water shield. When spread thin over hides, seams, and the tops of moccasins, it changed how water behaved. Drops didn't sit, they slid, like rain rolling off wax. And once water keeps moving, it can't steal heat. They warmed the fat until it softened, stirred in ash until it thickened, then rubbed the mixture into the places the rain attacked first: shoulders, back, knees, edges where the hide folded. It wasn't pretty, but it was precise. A layer built for function, not looks. And that was the point. It wasn't magic. It was maintenance, a treatment you repeated through the season the same way you check a roof before a storm. The people of the plains didn't trust luck to keep them dry. They trusted the small habits they did every day. The truth was simple. Waterproofing wasn't chemistry. It was experience. You learned how water moved. You learned how hide responded. And you shaped both into something that kept you warm. With their armor prepared, they turned to the final layer of protection. How they arranged the people inside the shelter itself. Moisture in a shelter never rises. It falls. At night, when the air cools and breath slows, the damp settles toward the edges, and the people lying on the outside feel it first, cold landing on the skin like a quiet drip. So the people of the plains changed the shape of their sleep. They built what we now call a warm core formation. The elders and children rested in the center where the air stayed stable. The stronger ones slept on the rim, taking the hit from the falling moisture. Not sacrifice, just balance. A system that used the heat of many to protect the few who couldn't make their own. They slept in a circle or a half circle depending on the lodge. Bodies close enough to share warmth, but not packed so tight that breath turned the air heavy. And around the edge, the hides were pulled firm so no sagging cloth could catch droplets and send them inward. It wasn't comfort, it was geometry. Heat held at the center, moisture directed away. A living layout built from observation, not guesswork. Because inside a cold shelter, organizing people is the same as organizing heat and humidity. Get that right and the night stays dry. And with the sleeping pattern set, they turned to the final challenge, keeping the rain from reaching the shelter at all. Heavy winter rain changes the world at night. The wind flattens sound, the ground turns slick, and the noise of falling water hides everything you need to hear. On the plains, silence during a storm was never calm. It was danger. So the people built two circles, one to keep water away, one to keep threats out. The first was a small rain berm made from packed soil and grass just high enough to turn the flow. Water followed the curves, slipped around the camp, and never pooled at the base of the lodge. Simple, predictable, a system, not a guess. The second circle was alive. Dogs rested on the rim where the water ran. They could feel motion in the dark long before a human ear caught anything. And every weapon, every tool sat high on dry ground where moisture couldn't dull the edge. Rain may hide sound, but it doesn't hide movement. Not if you know where to listen. That was their logic. Keep the camp dry, and you keep it safe. Because on the plains, surviving a storm was never just about warmth. It was about awareness. And that awareness is what carried them into the night. They didn't fight the rain. They watched it. The people of the plains knew water follows a path, and cold follows a rhythm. And if you read both, strength doesn't matter. Attention does. Most of us think staying dry is luck a break in the weather, a good jacket. But to them, dryness was built like warmth, layer by layer, choice by choice, precision over chance. They adapted to the storm instead of fearing it. Water runs, air settles, ground soaks. Respect those truths, and the storm becomes something you can work with. Their tools were simple grass hide soil observation, nothing modern. Yet those tools formed a system that kept whole families dry through freezing rain, a system built on discipline, not fire or luck. Modern life forgets this. Staying dry wasn't an accident. It was a habit, a quiet skill shaped by awareness. And awareness weighs nothing. The rain keeps falling. The tent still holds. The ground stays dry. Their layers of hide, the lines of grass, the small choices made before dusk, all of it works together like a quiet engine. Not loud, not heroic, just steady. Even when cold water cut sideways across the plains, the people still had a system that carried them through the night. A system built on attention, not force. On reading the land, not fighting it. And that's the lesson that survives the storm. Staying dry wasn't luck. It was understanding. Stay by the fire. Bye.